Good afternoon. This is Bob Celeste, and welcome to Open Mic Friday, where we have weekly discussions with interesting people doing interesting things. For those of you who are on the live broadcast, if you'd like to engage and talk to Anton today, then just either raise your hand on the broadcast or type in a question. I'll try to open up your mic and you can talk, and that'll be a lot of we'll have an interesting discussion. So today our guest is Anton Vashkevich. Anton, did I get that right, or did I just ruin your last name?
Oh, Vashkevich, yes.
Okay, sorry about that. And Anton is founder and CEO of Contract.one, a cloud-based solution for multi-party negotiations for speeding up contract workflow. And today, the reason why I asked Anton to be on is Anton is involved with the Accord project, which is a project that's looking at contract language, regular legal contract language, and how they might be used in blockchain in the form of smart contracts and what portion of that might be used. It's very interesting as we start to see more companies using blockchain for co-development and what that means as far as from a legal point of view and from a contract perspective. So Anton, welcome to the program. And you're in Moscow, so you're up late. So thank you for being up late for us.
Yeah, no problem.
So maybe you could tell us just a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you came to the Accord project and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so I basically have three big things I'm working on right now. One is this Contract.one you mentioned, the tool for contractual work. Another is Simplawyer. This is my team who is doing legal design and legal automation. And part of this work is dedicated to smart contracts. And the third part is a big research we're doing with lawyers and technical guys about a general concept of law automation, so that we could have not only smart contracts, but also smart laws, smart corporate regulations, and so on. So I started as a lawyer, but even at the time I was studying, I really worked as a programmer and designer. So this kind of crazy mixture, it seemed crazy at that time. It kind of evolved into those projects I'm doing now. So I used to be a regular corporate M&A lawyer, and we started a company and we shifted to legal tech.
That sounds like a dangerous combination of skills there, an attorney and also a technologist.
Yeah, and it's funny. Even there were no ideas about smart contracts and blockchain 15 years ago, but programming really helped to draft better contracts. So now I understand why, but at that time it seemed like magic.
So what's a general topic? You're talking about law automation, and so what are you concerning yourself with there in that perspective?
Well, at first we were inspired by I think it was 2013 when we got inspired with this general idea of smart contracts, and we thought that it's probably a bit narrow at the moment. What if this could be something bigger? What if laws could be more straightforward and they could be automatically, they could work automatically? And this is especially, I think, important for Russia and for countries like that, where you would sometimes like the laws to really work, and so that they could work on their own with less people. So we're trying to find a general approach how this could be done, because there are many ideas that law is code, code is law, and so you just sit by the computer, you you code anything that you see in the law, and there you go. But it doesn't really work like that, because law is basically a simplified model of life. So it's there are so many options, and it's really impossible to put it into a smart contract model. So we're trying to find other ways how this could be done in conjunction with programming, machine learning, ontologies, better drafting, and a different approach to involving people into executing transactions and laws.
We in a couple of our guests have come on, and we've talked a little bit about the Gartner hype cycle or hype curve, where blockchain is kind of hitting that trough of disillusionment. And I was just wondering whether that's you've experienced that in the work that you've done. You talked about initially sort of being excited about the concept of being able to translate law into code. And I wonder if, as you started to get into it, you started to see some of the issues involved in doing that.
Yeah, and I think we were a moderate pessimists from the very start, because well, first it all started with cryptocurrencies, and if you have blockchain, if you have cryptocurrencies, now this is going to change the law. You would not need the law at all. But we work with businesses, and we work with corporate clients, and they're very down to earth people. So it all ends at at pricing, how much this would cost and how much we would save. And it turns out that the technology is not really ready for to be used widely in business. And we did quite a few projects, but they're still more like test projects. People are trying to see how this technology can be used, and what are the main obstacles in using that. And in quite many cases, people think that it's still better to use centralized solutions. Well, they're more efficient in quite many ways. But again, this is now we're kind of going, more. Let's say we're a bit more pessimistic about how blockchain is going to change the world. It's obviously not going to in the next few years, but we're trying to find the real life cases, how this could work, not with cryptocurrencies but with regular money, with off-chain assets, and with off-chain world.
Yeah, so if companies are starting to kind of look at this environment, it's almost a co-creation where the code, the application is not sitting behind anyone's firewall, but sort of out in the open, even in a permissioned blockchain, let's say. To your point about maybe not cryptocurrencies, but maybe more triggering of alerts that would exchange funds in a more traditional way. Is that sort of, as people start to come to this, they realize that if we do embed things in the code, that if it's self-executing, maybe we don't want to take that step right now. Maybe that's a future step that as we get comfortable with the technology.
That's very true. It's, on the one hand, it's not very easy at this stage to create the system that would pay automatically and execute smart contracts. But on the other hand, it's difficult, sometimes difficult to explain in a commercial way, so that commercial people would understand why they need their money to be drawn automatically with no control from their side. And so that's why most of the projects at this stage are still kind of either marketing projects or test projects. But where I think where it's going to take off is with the most basic products and with most standardized utilities. So, for example, here in Russia, there's a great case where an airline buys fuel from another company, from the airport, basically, and so they have this smart contract for this fuel, and at the moment when the fuel is in the jet's wing, the money is withdrawn from the airplane from the airline account. And on the one hand, for them, we could probably think that it's not very beneficial when the money is drawn without any control. But on the other hand, they think that they say that they save quite a lot on administrating this all these costs and all these procedures related to payments. And another example is buying utilities like electricity or water or steam or something like that. So a lot of these things are already digitized. There are sensors of all kinds, and there are billing systems automated everywhere already. And it's quite easy to put a smart contract on top of that. And there are quite many utility companies who are now exploring the possibility of automating their sales. So in the end, yes, it's on the one hand they're kind of cautious. On the other hand, they see the benefits.
And I see groups such as the Accord project and again, being early days, it was really interesting to see that group come together to start to put some intelligence behind how contracting could take place, because this is a shared environment of development. And to your point before about the kind of knee-jerk reaction of smart contracts and of cryptocurrencies is that people would transact immediately. But as you said, that's really not how corporations work, and it's kind of an alien environment. But even if we're not talking about exchanging currencies, even having an application that we co-develop and put in the middle, we still need some legal constructs around that. And I thought some of the work that the Accord project is doing around those areas was interesting. Around, this is not just a piece of software anymore that sits behind our firewall. It's sitting between companies.
Sure, and I think they're doing a great job. They're trying to link contracts in natural language with programs, with those little snippets of code that could be integrated into other automated solutions. So it's I mean, standardization is always a step for better efficiency, and what they're doing, they're trying to make standard approaches to drafting, to using, to linking natural language to code, and I think this is a great idea standing behind that, so that you would not just make a smart contract from scratch every time, like it's done right now, but you would probably choose one of a few hundred of most popular cases, and you just introduce it into your program.
So a lot like templates that you would bring in, and then based on your specific needs, you might alter those.
Yeah, so they're based on code templates, and they develop some standard data structure so that these would templates and data would work together, and you could easily create a smart contract, a ready smart contract. I think they have this template studio where you could, it's a web-based editor where you could just test them. You could edit them to the extent as possible. And so what they're trying to do, they're trying to change the way the smart contracts are developed right now. And right now they're developed like, well, if you can compare it to drafting a document. So to make a document, you would just open a Word processor and you would just type it now. But with smart contracts, it looks like before doing that, you need to develop Windows operating system, and then you need to develop Word, and then you write a few words. And I think this is how the development of smart contracts looks like right now.
Is that so when I go into the Accord project there, they mention Cicero as a specification and Concerto. Are those things that they've actually developed?
Yes, I think, well, there is this open source platform that GitHub where you could actually see what they do. Mm-hmm. And a lot of code snippets are quite fresh, so you can easily say if the project is abandoned when you see that the last change has been made 3 years ago. But these are quite, they keep working, they keep rolling out new versions of their framework. So yeah, this is it looks like a really alive project.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's like a think tank with code happening at the same time.
Yeah, and at least there seem to be a lot of lawyers there. I'm judging by the logos on the website. I'm not sure how much work they're doing there, but it's an interesting collaboration there.
I spoke in Washington to a group of attorneys from companies that have to do with the pharmaceutical industry, and kind of made mention at smart contracts and how that might change what they do over time. Certainly not by tomorrow morning, but is that something that you see within even in schools starting to talk about this concept of automating law?
I think yes. I think Ethereum did a great job in actually waking up lawyers. So the Ethereum smart contracts are actually not really contracts, and they're not too smart. So it's but this idea of automated contracts, I think it woke a lot of lawyers up, and many of them start to to look to work at their future career, for the future career. Mm-hmm. And actually, I saw a few examples here with lawyers with whom I work. Some of them, having worked in law firms and in-house departments, they now take they get education in computing. Some of them do that even in quantum computing. So they see that the profession is changing, and universities and law schools, they start having those at least general legal tech overviews, what's happening around them. But everybody understands that the legal profession in 10 years is going to look quite different.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's forward looking for them to start to dig into those areas and at least become educated on what this means. I know that we we talked a few days ago, and I had mentioned that a long time ago. I was told when I started programming, don't get used to it because we're going to be able to push a button at some day and we'll create the code and we won't have any need for programmers. Is that the kind of, if you talk about the marketing spin on this to attorneys, to lawyers, is that the kind of thing that they may be hearing?
Yeah, I mean, anything that sounds scary is a good marketing tool and is good news. Well, it's the lawyers they kind of try to decide where they're going. Some are definitely sure that nothing would change and they would have their work for at least 20 or 30 years before they go to pension. But I think this is there's a very good effect from this marketing hype. We all know that it's not going to be like that. There's not going to be, at least in the next 5 to 10 years, there's not going to be a magic button that would make smart contracts. There would not be magic artificial intelligence that is going to solve cases and do the legal work. But the shift, I think the shift is going to be tremendous in 5 to 10 years, because well, if smart contracts are definitely going to take off, and they're going to work much better when there would be more integrations, more easy integrations available from banks. There would be more standardization with banks when IoT is going to be more standard and it would be easier to be integrated. So this will all happen, I think, in the next probably 5 years, and then I think the legal the contract work would change quite a lot, because to me, with having 15 years of contract experience, contract work, it looks like we lawyers we look at risks retroactively. So we think that if the breach is going to happen, how we're going to react on that, how we're going to prove that in court, what are we going to do about that. But what the change in the contract work is going to be this. I think the lawyers would think in terms of proactive risks. So, for example, if we put sensors on trucks, and instead of just writing that the driver should be careful and that there is fragile cargo in there, the sensors would do the work and they would automatically adjust the fees for the transportation fees. And so I think lawyers would need much more background in economics and in technology, and they would probably be thinking of how not to let people break the contract and how it would work, with all those sensors and with all this IoT.
So even today, as an attorney, if you're looking to, as a strategy for even developing a contract, and you're looking for ways of making sure it's clear and that the other party can't sort of get out of what their obligation is, like as you're saying, tomorrow, if there's part of that that's actually in a smart contract, and I think I've heard of the BITA project, and that's in the U.S. It's a project for transport, and they're looking for ways of doing exactly what you were talking about through the sensors, through a number of ways of being able to interact directly with a smart contract that would be part of a legal construct.
Yeah, I think the shift here is about the concept of breaching contracts. So I think it was in the Founder movie when he said that the contracts are like hearts; they're meant to be broken. So and this is the actual concept right now. When some of legal work sometimes is about not really looking what you cannot do, but for how much you can do this and for how much you can do that. But with smart contracts, I think this could go away, and to a certain extent. So you would definitely know that some things would just not happen even if you wanted to do that. So the contract is not the regular contract is definitely not a guarantee that people would act like that. We just suppose that they would. We suppose that there is a court that would force them to do that, to act this way. But it's not a guarantee. Smart contracts could change that in some way.
Do you see a point where legal contracts would reference specific smart contracts and vice versa? There might be some back reference to where they apply?
Yeah, I think in any case, smart contracts would probably not exist on their own. So I don't quite believe in law as code and code as law at this stage. Probably in a few years, maybe in 10 years, there would be machine-to-machine contracts when your fridge would negotiate with Amazon and buy and make better deals and buy products for you. But we haven't come to that yet, and we still have a traditional legal system. We still have courts. So that's why there would be a mix of natural language and code. So I think at least what it looks like right now, there are paper contracts with natural language that have references to algorithms. They would, for example, say that the payment is going to be carried out the way it is programmed in this external algorithm, and this is how we define it.
Okay.
And vice versa. I think there would be smart contracts where, let's say, 80% of the legal relations would be coded and would be automated, but there would still be 20% of things that you don't need to automate, like arbitration or applicable law, or things like that. So it would just be a mix of legal code and I think in Coda they call it legal prose. So it's just regular text for people. So yeah, to sum up, there would be a mixture of natural language and programming.
We've just recently, in the past year, we saw issues arise with some of the privacy laws that, especially that have occurred in the EU, that talk about where data is physically, and then as you know, with blockchain, data is distributed. Do you see the same kind of thing happening with this, or is this actually help maybe clarify the differences between international laws between countries? Where you're trying to come up with a contract that fits for both sets of laws. I'm wondering if this is a help or a hindrance or a difficulty.
It's definitely a good thing. Again, if you try to implement standard provisions, whether in the natural language or in programming, this definitely helps to parties in different countries. Well, for example, if we take Incoterms, this helps a lot to avoid lots of problems. But that's a really good point about storing information and privacy laws and GDPR and all these things. It would, I think, it would just require a lot more work from lawyers and engineers to see how the information, where the information is stored, how it flows, and what laws could catch it, and where you could breach regulations. And so you would start choosing the technology already with lawyers. So you would need lawyers to choose technology. You'd probably not always be able to choose public blockchains. Maybe you'd have to choose something different. Maybe it would not even be a blockchain. So there is no single answer to your question, but
Okay.
there's a different there's a lot of work for lawyers in this sense.
Sure.
They also find fun work.
We have a question from someone that's on the call right now. I'll just open it up here. And Stan?
Sure.
Hi, Stan.
Hey.
Trying to see if Stan, are you there?
Yeah. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, so we can. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so my question was, have there been any cases yet where the terms of a smart contract have been upheld in court, or is that kind of the breakthrough that really would align the ability of a smart contract to be a legally binding agreement? And not only in the U.S., but anywhere for that matter.
Well, to my knowledge, not yet, just because there's a lot of speaking about smart contracts, but there are not so many smart contracts. I think there are more articles about smart contracts than smart contracts themselves. But from the legal standpoint, I think there are different approaches. One of them is that smart contracts are nothing new to the law, because it's basically just some kind of automation. Mm-hmm. So if you take, for example, margin calls, or if you take some internet online shopping, it's sort of like smart contracts. So you get some obligations automated, some things work without people. So these are basically smart contracts, and you don't need special laws for that. So I think the risks the legal risks related to smart contracts could be grouped in few categories. One of them is just the judge doesn't understand what a smart contract is, and is just new, and they would just be stressed to make a decision on a smart contract. So it would be unpredictable. Another part of problems would be related to the software, because, well, smart contract is a software with all the problems that software has got, including bugs, including all these kind of problems. So one of them could be that the text in the natural language is different from the text from what the smart contract does. Mm-hmm. So what would prevail? Like you already mentioned, there could be problems with different privacy laws and maybe internet information laws. So yeah, it's still a gray area. It shouldn't be something new for courts, but it's still very, very unpredictable.
Yeah, I guess that's where I was curious, because I think that first agreement, it would sort of become almost like the killer precedent, if you will. I mean, not a killer app, but a killer precedent that would kind of open the doors for smart contracts to be used more more widely. I would suspect that, yeah, and I think you were going down the path of like with e-commerce and things like that. I would suspect that the first rollout may in fact be a kind of a hybrid where there's sort of a paper version that's documented and agreed upon, but maybe it references a smart contract within a blockchain, and kind of go from there. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see as how that progresses over time.
Yeah, I think this is the safest model to use a standard contract with bits of automation supporting it. And yeah, I agree that the first case would either encourage people or discourage them greatly to try that. But in the end of the day, everything's got to be all right. That's what I think.
Yep. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Denise, I just unmuted you.
Hey, Bob, thanks. Anton, I'm curious, I have two questions. First, are the smart contracts referenced in this presentation aligned to any existing contracts, i.e. GS1 or something like that, that you're aware of?
Existing standards?
Yes, I'm sorry, any existing standards?
Could you elaborate on that a bit? I didn't quite.
Sure. You referenced the smart contract templates, and I'm curious, is the development of those, were those based upon any existing standards related to smart contracts? I know standards is kind of tough because they're still evolving, but
Yeah.
what did you guys use as your basis, I guess? What standard?
Well, the idea behind that is that a code project is creating a standard. So I think everybody is just trying to bring best practices they saw, and but to be quite honest, I'm not really sure that there is some a huge basic standard on which everything is built. So it's now evolving. That's what I would say.
Okay, no, it's helpful. So you guys you said creating standards based on best practices, which is a pragmatic approach. And then the second question is, I'm interested in finding, if possible, where some of these smart contract templates reside. Is there a web link or something you could sort of point us to?
Sure. There's a website, contract.one, and there is a repository for templates, and for there's a lot of documentation of where it's going, about the language, this domain-specific language, Ergo, that Code Projects is using for that. So I would suggest you start with that. And there's also this GitHub repository with a lot of samples there already.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise.
Sure.
I'm just going to bring Daniel on. I think he's got an interesting question for maybe for a contract. Hey, Daniel.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Anton. Thanks for the. It's very interesting topic. I have a question. It was just basically, when we talk about smart contracts, it seems that the most simple of the smart contracts is a non-disclosure agreement, which is this basic agreement between two companies, which always takes some time and seems to slow things down. And I was wondering, could a smart contract, fulfill that somehow?
Well, that's a very good example, I think. Well, for myself, this is how I see how the smart contract works. First of all, it needs some input data. Then it has some logic, and then it has some output behavior. So the output behavior in this case is pretty simple. Somebody pays a fine, or some documents get destroyed or get blocked. So I think this could be implemented fairly easily. But what what is challenging in this particular contract is the input information. So you need to track the breach of NDA, and this breach could be anything. So you could tell this the confidential information to somebody. You could share it on Facebook, but you would probably not write, "This is the confidential information from that NDA and it's prohibited." You would probably put it in some different words, and it would be, I think, quite hard to find it automatically. So most of the difficulties with a lot of contracts and a lot of obligations, they're related to the input information. There's not so much objective information that could be caught by scanners, and it could be caught automatically. So this is where it would probably be not the first case where you could use the smart contracts, I think. But with simpler constructions like sale and purchase, lease, or some banking products, I think this is quite a workable scenario. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I understand the automatic causality of it. I'm wondering, I'm wondering with an NDA, could you still say, okay, if somebody says there was a breach of this NDA, what is the next step? That could be automatically defined. I don't know exactly what the next step would be, but that I think that would even improve the integrity of the NDA in the first place, which usually is not such a very well, contemplated document.
I would agree with you, but there is one little issue with that, I would say. If somebody tells that the contract is breached, and then it works automatically, I think here could be a problem, because what if somebody is wrong? What if the contract is not breached? What if you don't agree with that idea? So in a regular contract, you would start with negotiating, or you would then continue with litigation. But your money is just withdrawn, and you can't even do anything about that. So the smart contracts will work with objective information and not subjective information. And breaching the NDA I think, lies more in the area of subjective information and opinions.
Would it be enough just to hash the NDA and just prove that both parties signed that, so that, because I know I've signed a number of NDAs that I could probably insert an extra page in there. And
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, one thing is that you prove that you signed the NDA, and I think it shouldn't be a big problem. Another thing is, did you really breach the NDA? Did you really do anything wrong?
You're right. So, I mean, that's a much more difficult thing.
Yeah. So, and this is quite subjective, and I think subjective and smart contracts are not quite compatible at the moment.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned rentals before and things like that. Maybe they'll be the first sort of foray into this, where you rent a bike or you rent something, and maybe that could be part of this kind of contract that you sign up to.
Yeah, that's a very good case. And renting a bike as a basic scenario, and it could be upgraded to let's say, commercial rent, where you would not only have the standard payments, but you could have all kinds of variables that influence your final amount. And smart contracts could help you calculate that, help everybody to be objective about that, help to read the sensors, and just make the payment automatically. So yeah, rent is one of the, I think, the best cases for smart contracts.
Mm. And you know, one of the things that someone brought up in one of our past discussions was this notion of an individual maybe not necessarily monetizing their information, but at least being able to control their information. So as they interact with other organizations, and those organizations today are collecting data on them and making, making profit off of that. They had brought up a topic of being able to, I guess, provide some monetization if someone's going to use their information back to the individual. So I don't know if that makes sense how I put that.
Yeah, it's. I think it lies more in the field of economics and technology, but yeah, it's quite doable if, let's say, if the service is fair enough to do that, to suggest that.
Right. Yeah. So that would be.
It would be nice if Facebook could start with that.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think they were saying was that maybe not these organizations would do that on them of their own volition, but maybe the concept and certainly the technology behind it needs to mature to be able to make that happen. And then then you might go from there.
Yeah, but I think as soon as they come up with some viable business model, then this is doable. So I'd like to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be nice. So one of the things I noticed on Accord, and maybe I don't know if is, and this is what I took away from the work that's being done there and elsewhere, and to your point about automating law in general, is typically when we write code inside of companies, it's protected because it's behind our firewall, and if we make a mistake, then we kind of roll everything back and we change it. But now in smart contract on blockchains, we're doing that out in the open, maybe not in the public, but even in a private blockchain, we're doing it between at least two trading partners. And so it becomes almost co-development. One of the things I thought was coming out of this was that a notion that would help educate technologists as far as the kinds of things they need to put in their code, because they're now creating a contract and they're not just creating a piece of code that does some thing inside their firewall, but because this is between two trading partners, maybe constructs or I don't know, things that need to be included whenever you work with another, you co-develop with another company. If hopefully that makes some sense.
Yeah, I think the first thing that is going to happen is that the prices will just be driven up because of that. But yeah, so some of standardization could really help with that, because if two parties IT departments would not need to every time to come up with something new, and they could take some reliable code, that could be helpful. Mm-hmm. And maybe if there are larger parties and large transactions, this could definitely help to develop better practices of coding, maybe more simple, straightforward, coherent, and addressing risks in some more efficient way.
And do you see like the sort of if we talk about co-development, the testing phase of this? So typically when we go through and we develop an application, we don't typically, certain applications, certainly we would have direct attorney participation, but typically not. There would be some other department or group that would more interact with the attorneys. But do you see this environment as being where we start to bring the attorneys more into that acceptance testing of code if we're developing smart contracts?
Yeah, and I think there is already a legal engineer profession developing, and we do have one at our company, and we had a few similar projects where the developers would do the code, would probably not review the code itself, but we would test the product from the legal standpoint. We would test different scenarios, how this would work out if this changes, and we also were involved a lot in drafting the logic before they started making the code. So I think legal engineering is kind of a field for lawyers who get bored, and this is where they could move. And I think this is a good option.
But that's a good point you bring up as far as from a development community, as you start to bring together the team, if you will, that's going to work on a project, to bring the attorneys in first at the beginning during the design phase, and then again, as you're talking about the test scenarios from a legal standpoint that they may bring to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. So smart contracts, it's still a legal automation. So you would need lawyers, I think, in most of stages. And we already see that, these legal engineers, they start to appear in quite many companies. So you'll find them more often, and they would be part of IT teams and product teams.
Interesting. So we've created a whole new career group for.
There's a bunch of them. I could talk about it for hours, but yeah.
Interesting. Great. Well, we're coming up to the top of our hour. Anton, is there anything else you'd like to address on the subject? I think this is fascinating. It's certainly the aspects of legal automation, and now we've got a whole new career path for ourselves if we get bored with tort reform and things like that.
Yeah, I think, well, just to sum up, smart contracts, they're probably not as exciting as they used to be just a year ago, but they still do have a huge potential. And I'm waiting to see those end-to-end smart contracts. It's going to be a really interesting field for lawyers and for technology guys. So so it's taking off. Is just now not that visible as it used to be, but it's taking off, and it's an interesting technology for business.
Great. Well, Anton, I just want to thank you for coming on and for being part of the show. I know that you're heading into your evening. And so thanks for coming on, and we'll put up your contact information on the website so that people can reach out to you.
Thanks for having me. Great.
Thanks. And for others that are on the call that will be here next week, we'll be talking to Dirk Rogers, which if you've been in the middle of the Drug Supply Chain Security Act for so long, you'll recognize Dirk's name. He has a book out on traceability, and this should be also an interesting conversation about the other side of transacting, at least moving drugs through supply chains. So thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend. Anton, you have a great weekend. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you.